Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Interconnection Process Enhancements 2023 Track 3A Working Group meeting to discuss to kind of dig into more of the 3 revised straw proposal that we had posted back in July. My name is Elena Kopilov-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that these materials are available on the Interconnection Process Enhancements 2023 Initiative page. You can go there by going to CAISO.com, going to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top and selecting Policy Initiatives, and then searching or scrolling down for this initiative, and the presentation will be at the top of that page. This call is being recorded for informational convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. These working groups are intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage everyone's perspectives. Please be respectful and professional in your comments and discussion. And please try to refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can still manage this time efficiently. If you need any technical assistance during this meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. The event producer is listed as Intelor Events, and their name is Silas. To raise your hand, go to the bottom right and open the participant and chat panels, and the raise hand icon will be at the bottom of the participant panel. If you dialed in outside of the WebEx, you can press *3, and that will get you into the question queue to be able to unmute and participate in the discussion. And please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. And you can send questions in the chat to all panelists or to me. So today I'm going to hand this over to Danielle. We're going to continue with the introductions and then go to track 3A and 3B, updated and revised schedules, and then presentation of issues and working group discussions after that before we wrap up. And we will have one more working group on September 4th to continue any discussion that doesn't get covered today. I'm going to hand it over to Danielle Mills.
Elena, hi everyone. Just want to give you all some bearings for where we are in the stakeholder process. We are back to the point of in between the straw proposal and the draft final proposal. We'll probably go through a few drafts at this point, but you know, it's been a long journey together, and I think a lot of the concepts that we'll be talking today really respond in track 2 of the interconnection process enhancements. And even after the last round of comments, we recognized that there's need to sort of unpack some of them in working group meetings. So that's where we are today. I'll go to the next slide to give a little bit more information on where we are right now. The goal for today is to provide some procedural updates on IPE Track 3 and an update on schedule changes. We'll talk about that in a moment. We want to spend a lot of time talking about TPD allocation issues with all of you to inform the next Track 3 proposal. This is something that when we reviewed comments, we really realized needed more stakeholder discussion. And so we'll plan to discuss as much as we can today. We have some sort of more focused questions for you. But we'll plan for a more in-depth discussion or a continued discussion of some proposed solutions during the next working group meeting too, which is a week from today on September 4th. So there will be some information on next steps after this working group meeting too. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, or sort of teased, stakeholder comments did really indicate the need for more discussion around the Track 3A deliverability allocation methodology changes and some of the proposals that we made in the revised straw proposal. So we're still exploring details for the Track 3B issues, particularly looking at the Cluster 14 intercluster prioritization proposal. That is still on track. We don't plan to hold working group meetings on those topics. We just really want to focus for the sake of today and next Wednesday on the Track 3A deliverability issues. That's where I think we need more information and perspective from all of you. So it's quite possible that Track 3A and Track 3B will both kind of realign, and that when we put out the next paper, it will be a Track 3 revised straw proposal for both issues in track 3A and 3B. So the working group meetings are really intended to help us flesh out some of those issues related to TPD allocations so we can move forward with a revised STRUP proposal, hopefully in mid-October. So that's what we're shooting for. In light of the comments and the time that we want to take on working group meetings, we've also pushed the initiative out and are now targeting the March 2025 Board of Governors meeting for hopeful approval. And we think that that affords us sufficient time, and Bob will talk about a little more detail around our internal schedule for making that work as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and actually before we go to that, I'll just see if there are any questions on process or sort of why we're here today. Yelena, do you mind going back one? Thank you.
Susan had her hand up, but it looks like it's been lowered. There's no other hands currently and no questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Well, then with that, I will hand it over to Bob.
All right, thank you, Danielle, and good morning, everybody. So we wanted to start out by kind of rolling out what we have decided to do within the TPD allocation process. Just to be clear about it, the tariff only requires us to put out a market notice in order to set the dates. There are no set dates within the tariff. However, the tariff does require that we do have an annual TPD allocation process. And so what we are proposing here would require a tariff change to allow us to do this. The reason that we're looking at making these modifications is as we look closer at the schedule that we propose to FERC related to cluster 15, where the cluster 15 cluster studies are scheduled to start June 1st of 2025. And under the standard timeline that we proposed for the TPD allocation process, where the affidavits would be due March 15th, we'd go through a couple months period of validating those and then go into the TPD allocation studies. Those would fall pretty much at the same time that we would be beginning the cluster 14 studies. And with the shortened timeline to do the study work for the cluster studies and doubling up the work by having another study at that time just really didn't seem like that was something we could truly accommodate. And so we took a look at the schedules and came up with a number of different scenarios of what we thought might be the best way to proceed, and landed on this particular proposal that we wanted to inform everybody on. And we'll be putting this in our next paper, but wanted to make everybody aware of this. And in doing this proposal here, this actually gave us more time to actually kind of slow down the track 3 process so that we could actually have these work group meetings, and because we'd be going to the board in March rather than in December of 2024 as originally planned. So just to go through the process that we're proposing is that for 2025, rather than seeking to have the retention affidavits due in mid-March, we would hold off until September 1st to get those affidavits, which would give everybody more time that actually have allocations that need to do something to retain them, more time to actually do that. And then we would go into the TPD studies around November 1st of 2025 with the actual results coming out somewhere around the end of March of 2026. With that being the case, it really wouldn't make sense for us to do something in 2026 that might be a shortened cycle of some type. So we felt it was best just to actually skip the TPD allocation cycle in 2026. Just a couple points on that. The cluster 14 projects will have completed their eligibility to seek an allocation in 2025 under the current rules. And then cluster 15 would not be impacted because they will not be eligible to seek an allocation until 2027 at the earliest. So we felt this would have kind of the lowest impact on projects. Now, granted, certain projects I'm sure might want to be seeking in the 2026 year, but to go through a process to where we actually have something in 2026 and then have everybody that has a conditional allocation, such as being a shortlisted or potentially an allocation group D allocation, that would leave them very little time to actually confirm their allocation by either being able to demonstrate they have a PPA, or for group D that they're shortlisted. So the next allocation then would be in 2027, where we begin again what we have proposed to FERC as our annual schedule that starts every year, March 15th, with the affidavits being due at that point in time. So with that, let's open it up for questions on this slide.
Okay, let's go to Susan Schneider.
Yeah, hi. A couple of thoughts about the 2025 and the 2026 proposal. So the 2025 proposal, I think you may have some issues with people who have been trying to add storage and maybe come in for an allocation for that, even though they're not technically a new interconnection request. But the 2026 one, it seems like you have built in the assumption that, first of all, cluster 14, and because I'm, reading through the comments, some people had urged that cluster 14 have an additional opportunity to come in so that they would have 3 times like the cluster 15 and later. And so this 2026 proposal assumes that cluster 14 does not get another opportunity. And it also assumes that energy only projects would not be able, it seems like it assumes this, so maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like then you're also assuming that no energy only projects will be able to come in and ask for allocation. So I know some of the comments did dispute the CAISO proposal to not allow energy only projects to come in and ask for an allocation if they got, say, a PPA or shortlisted. And so it seems like the 2026 remarks here assume that they would not be able to come in. So is that what you're assuming here?
I would say your first assumption is correct, that this statement here about cluster 14 is assuming they would continue on the track that they are on now under the current tariff guidelines. It does not assume anything for energy only projects, though.
Well, if the energy only projects would have the ability to come in and ask for an allocation, it seems like they would want to have some opportunity to do that potentially in 2026.
Understood.
That's why I was asking the question.
Yeah, actually made that statement that, there would be some projects that would be wanting to seek an allocation in 2026. But so this proposal would not allow for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, let's go to Soumya.
Hi. So this is Soumya Shastri with PG&E, and I apologize if I'm not following the discussion. So cluster 14, under the proposal, I understood that each cluster has 3 chances to seek TPD. And so
the proposal was, yes, that starting with cluster 15, every cluster group would have 3 opportunities to seek an allocation. The proposal was that cluster 14 would remain under their current process and for parking and so forth.
Okay. So cluster 14 so cluster 15 would have 27 and presumably 28 and 29. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then, so cluster 14, if you could just educate me then. So cluster 14 would have 25, and then if they've parked, or they would have additional opportunities in 27 or beyond?
Under the current guidelines, everybody has an opportunity or is eligible to park for the first year. To be able to park a second year, there are some conditions or requirements associated with that, where the first one is first of all, there has to be TPD that's available in the area that a project is seeking deliverability. And if it turns out it's all been allocated out, there is nothing more, then they're not eligible to park. There's another condition that if they are sharing network upgrades with other projects and not all of those projects park where some of them want to move forward, then a project in that group is not eligible to park as well. So for the most part, I don't believe that any cluster 14 projects will actually be able to park a second year.
Okay, so to boil it up then, cluster 14 would have the 2025 option, and then after that, that would be their last opportunity, essentially, given that this other parking opportunity wouldn't be there, we assume.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
remained to be seen whether, energy only projects could come back other, into either in allocation groups where the PPA allocation group or the short looks allocation group. So that's something that's still to be developed and continuing discussion in the further papers that come out.
Okay, thank you for that. That's it for me.
Okay, the next hand is from Rayanne.
Good morning. Thank you so much. This is Rayanne Quadra with Gridwell Consulting on behalf of EDF Renewables. I just wanted to bring up an item for consideration. I don't really have an answer to this question, and maybe we don't yet either, but as we skip to 2026 cycle year, are we concerned about creating sort of a midterm reliability supply issue down the line, since we will have LSEs running RFOs and not having sort of a new supply of deliverable projects to enter those RFOs, and just sort of in this circumstance relying on a backlog of projects that do have deliverability. I think it's just sort of worth looking at the volumes of those things before we eliminate all the abilities for folks to seek TPD that Susan mentioned in her previous comment.
Yeah, just to speak to that a bit, for cluster 14, there was a very large number of projects that received an allocation under allocation group D. So by extending the 2025 allocation window for receiving the retention affidavits to September 1st, that leaves a pretty long period for those projects to continue to market their projects and to get a PPA and shore up those allocations. So we don't necessarily see skipping 1 year under these conditions as something that would really be detrimental to the resource adequacy program, bringing the amount of capacity online every year that we anticipate is needed.
I can see how you've made that leap, and I guess I just wanted to maybe request that folks out there in the RFO space or LSEs weigh in and see if we're all sort of in agreement on that. I can see where your solution could work. Thank you for considering.
Okay, the next hand is from Max.
Max, your line is unmuted. You should be able to go ahead with your question. Max, we're not getting any audio from your line. You may be double muted on your headset. But if you are able to send your question via the chat, we'll be able to read it out loud from there.
Everybody hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about this cluster 14 issue. Was 2024 the first year that TPD was allocated for cluster 14?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so with the parking rules, a project could theoretically have parked in 2024, go for 2025 TPD, and that one chance would be their only chance where they could go again in the next cluster. You mentioned them being able to go twice.
Yeah, the opportunity to park the first year really is their first opportunity. And they're choosing the option to park rather than seek an allocation. So I don't know how many projects actually chose that because there were a large number that chose allocation group D, but I know not all projects wanted to go down that route because allocation group D does have some restrictions. So those projects that did park would have one more opportunity to seek an allocation in 2025.
Okay, understood. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is a cluster 14 project is subject to the previous TPD rules, which sort of stipulate that if you don't receive TPD, then you'll be converted to energy only. But again, you can continue pursuing TPD, and this sort of takes away that aspect of the previous rules, which sort of seems like a disadvantage to me. So I'm thinking about, like either give cluster 14 3 opportunities per the new rules, or allow energy only projects that have been converted to continue pursuing an allocation for 2026, but having cluster 14 kind of be 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the old and new rules seems like a little bit of a disadvantage, but I'm curious what your response is.
Yeah, within the proposal, we did propose moving forward that once a project has been converted to energy only and no longer able to seek an allocation, then the only way they could actually get an allocation is by allocation group C, which is projects that have come into commercial operation.
Yeah.
So that's still, that was in the last proposal. And however, there was a transition period associated with that to where projects in cluster 14 and earlier would have at least one more opportunity to seek an allocation as energy only in all of the allocation groups, including they've obtained a PPA or they've been shortlisted. So there was proposed a transition period for cluster 14 and earlier projects within that proposal.
Okay, and so that would apply to the 2027 TPD year for cluster 14, theoretically?
We'd have to decide on that one. I think it was really meant for 2025, but we did receive comments where people wanted more than just one more year. So, it's yet to be determined how that will actually play out. We haven't really developed the next proposal yet.
Okay, well, I would advocate that I think, obviously we want the reforms to go forward, but we don't want projects that have had commercial decisions be made in certain rules kind of be negatively affected by that. So to the extent that a project hasn't been converted to energy only yet, I think that allowing them to go again if they don't receive TPD in 25 to go in whatever the next cycle is, aka one more time, makes sense to me as a potential compromise there.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, the way we were thinking about it, it wouldn't be just cluster 14 that would have that opportunity. It would be earlier energy only projects as well.
Okay.
But at least that's the way it was written in the paper.
Okay, thank you. That's everything.
Okay, let's go to Aisha Bari.
Hi, good morning. Bob, thank you for this. I was trying to envision the process for cluster 15, actually. I don't know if guys has already published the schedule to wrap up the re-study and the first pass study for cluster 15, but like how do you envision this, like starting from next year, June, there will be the first round of study. And then what do you think when that will get over? And then when will the following study happen, the re-study? And when will this TPD study happen? Like, will this be the last thing that will happen for cluster 15 after the re-study is complete in 2026 sometime? Could you like lay out the schedule for cluster 15 here?
Actually, I don't have that at my fingertips. I'd have to kind of search for that schedule and pull it up. trying to think off the top of my head if I remember it well. Yeah, I'd just soon not try to test my memory on that and get it wrong. So that's something we can provide following the meeting.
So yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, because actually, like the delay to September next year for cluster 14, I, I might be wrong, but there are so many cluster 14 projects right now in category D and B, and they are essentially participating. Some of them are participating in the same RFPs as cluster 15 for point allocation. So it actually helps some cluster 14 projects. I feel they'll get a little bit more time. So this could help out those projects that are, like kind of, I'm sure the CCAs and the LSCs have limited allocation capabilities. So once this whole cluster 15 thing is over in December 1st, they can fully focus on cluster 14, and the cluster 14 projects will get a little bit more leeway to get those shortlists or executions to retain their deliverability. So, yeah, to me, I feel like this is actually helping some projects in a way. But would really appreciate if you, Kaiso, could release the schedule for cluster 15. Maybe I'm wrong. I have not seen it anywhere, like specific schedule beyond June next year. And we were making estimations of when what will happen, but if Kaisu can share the official schedule, that will be really helpful. And then we can like coordinate, okay, how long after all the cluster 15 studies is complete will we actually get deliverability. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next hand is from Humberto.
Hi, this is Humberto Branco with Savian. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for the presentation. Just a clarification on cluster 14. So projects that got zero allocation and parked on these TPD 2024, now we're going to seek for TPD in 2025. What happens if we don't get allocated again? Can we park again and seek allocation in 2027 or no?
Under the current guidelines, you'd have to be able to meet the criteria to be able to park a second year. And those criteria, as I stated earlier, were one, they have to actually have some transmission plan deliverability still available in their area to be able to park. And the other criteria is if they are sharing a particular network upgrade that is being funded by a number of projects, all the projects funding that upgrade have to decide to park in order to allow one of them to park. So both of those criteria would have to be met to park a second year.
Got it. Thanks for the explanation. So it's possible, but very unlikely considering the size of the cluster and other projects.
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate statement.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, Vineet is our next hand.
Hi, this is Vineet from Clearway. I don't think it's mentioned here, but in terms of the second posting for the park project, cluster 14 park project, it's extended to July of next year, but I see that the TPD allocation happens not until March 2026. So is it that cluster 14 projects that are parked have to make their second posting before the TPD results?
That's an issue that we would have to come to a conclusion. How do we want to proceed on that in order to keep it on par with the way we've always done things, to where the second posting for parked projects wouldn't be due until, roughly the time the allocations come out. We would have to shift that. So that's a decision that we'd have to make. But I think that would be something we would definitely consider doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, And that covers all our hands.
Yeah, I thought there was something come up in the chat.
Yes, and all the chat questions were answered individually, and we did add that that the schedule, not including the pending TPD dates, will be posted to kaiso.com on Friday.
Okay, great.
Oh, I think this is one that did not get answered. There's a question from Doug Carpa. Oh, it would be reassuring to know how many megawatts of ELCC value would have been allocated deliverability compared to the MTR requirements, just to know whether we are headed for a shortfall under this proposal.
Well, I don't know if Robert or Benet want to comment on that, but I don't have a comment for that question.
Okay, and Susan Schneider's got her hand up.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I apologize. I just missed that last one. Did you say that you were going to post the cluster 15 schedule by Friday in response to Aisha's question, or was there something else you were going to be posting?
Yeah, we are going to be posting this week the updated information related to the transmission plan deliverability that's available by constraints in that information. And so we made the commitment to also publish the schedule for cluster 15.
Okay, so you're okay. So those are two different things. So the cluster 15 schedule information, that was what Aisha was asking for. You're going to post that by this Friday, and also sort of the updated package. Are we going to find out which zones are merchant and which ones are TPD zones by Friday as well?
That's our intention, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so both of those. Okay, thanks so much for clarifying that.
Okay, Bob, there's no other hands currently up and no other questions in the queue.
Okay, well, let's move down to next slide, just as kind of an intro. The modifications TPD allocation process, we want to have discussions. So let's go to the next slide. So within the proposal that we put out for the modifications TPD allocation process, there's three particular categories of issues that really don't work out well as the proposal is written without some assurance that other areas could actually help solve some of the problems outside of the ISO allocation process. Or if that's not the case, we may have to do some additional adjustments or modifications to the TPD allocation process within the ISO tariff. So just to start out, wanted to just summarize what those three issues are. They're similar, but they each have their unique differences that make them unique and possibly have different solutions. So the first one is related to TPD allocation issues for projects with long lead time or potentially delayed deliverability network upgrades, where those DNUs have actually been approved by the ISO transmission planning process, and therefore they are moving forward regardless of what any particular project may or may not be doing. The second issue is for allocations related to long lead time reliability network upgrades, where the RNU in this case only moves forward if it is funded by the project that actually need that RNU. So that's a significant enough difference to make it kind of unique from between 1 and 2. And then the last one is for TPD allocation issues for long lead time resources that have met defined resource policy goals of the local regulatory authorities in California for specific technologies and project locations. So let's move to the next slide. So the thing that we need to make sure that everybody's grounded in well here as we discuss these is really what has actually been proposed and so that we understand why these three scenarios that I just mentioned can be a bit problematic within what has been proposed. So within the last paper, the revised draft proposal that we had for track 3A, we proposed that projects would have 3 consecutive opportunities to seek an allocation, and that would begin with the affidavit window that closes during the cluster's interconnection facility study. And lots of comments related to this, but that's what the proposal is. And then after the 3rd opportunity to seek an allocation, projects that have not received an allocation would be converted to energy only. So that's kind of the background of what's been proposed and how projects that may not be able to get a PPA with, or be eligible to get an allocation at that time frame, could be problematic for those projects. So it may be difficult for long lead time network upgrades and long lead time generation resources to actually get that PPA or be shortlisted before they're converted to energy only, even if a number of opportunities were increased to 4. And that's, we did receive a number of comments requesting that. So actually giving an additional opportunity for a total of 4 is under consideration. But even with having 4 opportunities, certain projects, particularly long lead time resources, they may not be able to get a power purchase agreement within that time frame. We want to at least discuss ways that we might be able to, rectify that situation. So before we go to the next 3 slides that actually go into discussions on these specific 3 issues, let's open it up for questions related to these last 2 slides.
Okay, let's go to Susan.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I wonder, would you mind just going back 1 slide to slide 10? Because I just wanted to make a point, and I don't know how important that is for this process. But when you have long lead time or delayed DNUs coming out of the TPP, and then these long lead time or delayed RNUs, the long lead time is important because the TPP, if people are depending on an upgrade that's coming in 2034, obviously that's part of what this issue is here. But also the issue of delayed DNUs, and they don't come out of the TPP necessarily. They could just be any DNUs or any RNUs, the ones that come out of the study process. Obviously, that's I think for number 2. But the issue of it's not so much even upgrades that don't come out of the TPP can still be delayed, and the issue of delayed upgrades or people who people have been in the queue for a couple of years and then all of a sudden they get an reassessment that says, well, you're now behind an RNU and it's going to take another 4 years or something. I just think the delay issue is it's not so much where things are approved, it's the fact that there could be a delay. And so it could be the long lead time that's there in the beginning, and that's delaying the COD, but then the changes that happen in between are also problematic. So again, I don't know how that fits into this whole thing, but I thought it was important to keep in perspective. You have, people who have late stage delays on things also are really suffering in terms of the PPA, trying to get PPAs or keep them.
Yep, understood.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Bob, that's the only hand we had.
Okay, why don't we move to slide number 12?
Oh, we just had a raised hand from Mike. Go ahead, Mike. You might be double muted. We're not getting any audio. Oh.
How about now? Oops.
Can hear you now.
Hear you.
I should be unmuted. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry. There's a mention of a delayed, like long lead time projects and like not getting a PPA in time. I guess maybe the distinction that maybe I would highlight is, the long lead time being the time needed for construction and permitting versus the time needed for a PPA. I would maybe caution that it may not be prudent to withhold deliverability for projects that are struggling to get a PPA that are both long lead time in terms of the project development, but also in contracting. I would almost feel like maybe a PPA is a gating process to starting the development process. So, I just want to make sure we're not, holding back deliverability or, earmarking large network upgrades for contracts that, may not even get to a PPA. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that it does raise something that I did want to mention, which is the TPD allocation process was designed originally and continued to be designed around certainty for any given project moving forward. We want to make sure that we give deliverability to projects that we have a high level of confidence that the project is actually going to move forward into commercial operation. And the criteria that we've landed on has always been they have a power purchase agreement that is for the required type of PPA for it's got to be a minimum of 5 years and required RA. And then the second level below that is they are shortlisted for such a contract. Over the years, we've had a number of discussions about, is there other criteria that we could use to actually give an allocation? And as we've had those discussions, we haven't really landed on any additional criteria that we really felt was firm enough to actually give projects an allocation and to feel confident they are going to move forward. We have in the past had a couple of allocation groups where people didn't have to have a PPA to get an allocation that didn't require some sort of retention. And our experience was that those projects, some of them moved forward, but not all of them. So a number of those projects actually sat on an allocation that could have been used by a more viable project in hindsight. So, I think I just want to mention that, we are open to additional criteria, but with the caveat, we've discussed this a number of times in the past and haven't really been able to come up with criteria that we really felt was appropriate to actually give an allocation to a project that actually doesn't have some sort of retention criteria, like allocation group D, where you can get an allocation in group D currently, but there is specific retention criteria to where you can lose that allocation within a year. So just kind of wanted to lay that out that, solutions in that area are something that, we could consider as well. So just to get into this first issue, where the ISO is seeing increasing number of projects that are able to come online near term as energy only, but due to a TPP upgrade where it's a long lead time deliverability network upgrade, they are not able to actually achieve full capacity delivery status at the same time that the project can come online. So this is an area where power purchase agreement contract terms could be one of the solutions. So we wanted to throw this out and ask the question, could a PPA that allows a project to operate as energy only for some period of time before becoming full capacity delivery status be a viable option? So we wanted to start out the discussion, and this, getting into these next 3 slides, these are where we're going to just open it up for hopefully some good, robust discussion about what some opportunities might be, and kind of get people, the creative juices going, and we may not be able to fully flush out solutions here, but at least get the conversation going so that at the next working group meeting, I believe is on the 4th of September, that we could actually entertain some specific proposals during that day-long working group. So beyond this initial question, we do want to open it up for other solutions to be considered, but let's start off by just discussing this question here that's in the second to last bullet here of, could this particular situation actually be solved by allowing projects or creating PPAs that allows a project to go energy only rather quickly, knowing that they would have to wait for their full capacity delivery status to be counted towards RA at that point in time. So with that, let's open it up for discussion.
Okay, let's go to Sushant.
Sushant Barave, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead with your question. All right, Sushant, we're not getting any audio from your line. You might be double muted. If you can try again.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks. Sushant from Clearway Energy. Bob, thanks for recognizing this question here. We definitely think that offering a pathway for early interconnection for energy-only projects is critical. PPA would be one indicator. We also think that given the portfolio has close to 50% or maybe more build out that's identified as energy only, these projects definitely need an option to show commercial viability there. I also think that this pathway has to be paired with an interim deliverability framework, because that's what makes standalone energy only projects coming online earlier financeable. So these two go hand in hand. Would encourage CAISO to think about it as part of the larger solution, where because of long lead time upgrades, even projects that have deliverability sometimes cannot get the contractual assurance and show up early on as energy only when they can offer that energy benefit earlier. So would recommend some way of integrating the two issues here of interim deliverability and offering the early energy only interconnection.
Okay, so Shashank, just to comment on that, that is part of the track 3B discussion. I don't really see it necessarily tied specifically to the TPD allocation process. It is a separate issue. So we are, considering it in the 3B discussions. I will say though that from the ISO's experience, the level of projects or the number of projects that might be able to get some sort of a multi-year interim deliverability is much smaller than what could be accommodated if it could be accomplished through a power purchase agreement that allows projects to come online early as energy only, even if they wouldn't be eligible to get some sort of a interim deliverability for a year or more.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, recognizing that it's included in 3B, maybe our recommendation is consider if it can be moved to 3A, because in some ways, the viability of some project to move forward as just an energy only does depend on eventual contractual guarantee around interim deliverability as well.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, let's go to Renee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, this is Renee Steichen with RIP Renewables. I guess kind of along the lines of what Sushant was saying, I'm curious if you have talked to the PUC about this, and because I'll say for storage in particular, this would be difficult because of needing the RA contracts as the way to come online earlier. And if there's a way that the PUC would count this, and so I don't know if that would need to be interim deliverability or something, or if they would have, if just having the line of sight to FCDS would allow them to count in some way in the meantime would be viable there. So I realize this is maybe thinking about it differently for solar and wind versus storage projects, but it's operating, I know storage projects could operate merchant only energy and ancillary services, but without that RA component could be much more difficult. So the main question is whether you've
actually
talked to PUC.
Going to let Daniel chime in, but yes, we actually have had a conversation with the PUC related to all these issues. So why don't I turn it over to Danielle, who's more on point for those discussions. And Danielle, we can't hear you.
Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Thanks. So I think I see, well, I looked for a CPUC representative on the call. I don't think I see one. So if there is someone online from the PUC, feel free to raise your hand and provide more context and detail. But as Bob said, we did discuss this with them last week in advance of asking these questions to all of the stakeholders. And I think there is some value in continuing to explore this. I think there's interest in trying to get at this broader issue of what we're going to do for resources that have CODs that are almost too far out or have network upgrades that will take too long, and how to account for that in the procurement space. And so this was one idea that we explored and discussed, and I think they agreed that we should at least stakeholder it and explore it further. Okay, thanks.
Our next hand is from Eric.
Hey, Eric Little from CalCCA, and it's a very similar question. Danielle, did that also include any sort of MTR requirements or whatever comes out of RCPP? Because usually to meet those requirements, they require deliverability of those resources as well. So it's not just RA, it's also meeting any sort of procurement obligations that come out of orders from the commission. Was that part of that discussion as well?
Yes, though not in depth. We're still waiting for the RCPP as well. So I think there's a willingness to coordinate with them going forward on this. This is a policy that we want to pursue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next hand is from Soumya.
Hi, this is Soumya Shastri with PG&E, and I'm interested obviously in what the CPUC has to say, but from at least today's paradigm, I'd see this being a struggle for storage projects, which are a lot of the projects that are seeking deliverability. I could see this being more feasible for something that it has a generation component. So definitely, solar, wind, or possibly co-located or hybrid projects that we'd have to think about that as well. So I think that there'd be a lot of challenges, from a buyer's perspective. I don't know if we would want to pay the same price for something that is EO. And then from a project perspective, if they're receiving a lot less revenue, how do they get financing, especially if it's lithium ion and the facilities have a certain lifespan. So off the top of my head, if it's maybe if there's interim deliverability that can be explored, that's a possibility, but Bob highlighted the uncertainty involved with that. But if it's really long, I'd see this as challenging.
Right. Well, thanks for that. We're really looking for these type of comments because, bottom line, the ISO has limited visibility on the terms and conditions of the PPAs that are being negotiated. So we really need to get this type of input from everybody. At the same time, I'd, seek to challenge everybody to see, it might be something that's definitely been, a bit out of the box and more challenging to develop a contract that works both for the off-taker as well as the developer. But I would like to challenge everybody to see if it is possible. That could actually, create an opportunity for a lot of projects that, as the ISO continues to bring more and more deliverability network upgrades, getting them approved as policy-driven upgrades, excuse me, through the TPP process, we could see this issue continue to grow. So we're looking for as many solutions for this as we can get.
Well, look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
We'll go to our next hand from Vineet.
Hi, this is Vineet from Clearway. I just want to make sure I understand the language here on this particular slide. So this slide is talking about projects that yet haven't received TPD, correct? They're going for the first time for TPD allocation?
Well, I guess I wouldn't, categorize it quite that way. Just to take a step back, projects are now getting through the study process to where they are in a zone where they can become full capacity delivery status based on the transmission plan deliverability that isn't necessarily in place now, but it's planned, and projects have actually been approved through the transmission planning process. However, those upgrades in the TPP, can be 8-10 years out, potentially even more. And so projects that would have to rely on, such a long lead time deliverability network upgrade coming through the TPP process, they're not able to actually, at least today, off-takers are not executing or negotiating PPAs for projects to where they're not going to be full capacity delivery status for a period of 8 to 10 years out. And so with that being the case, if they're not willing to or able to get a BPA by the time that they're going to be converted to energy only after their 3 or 4 opportunities to get an allocation are done, then they're converted to energy only and much less likely to be able to get an allocation. So we're looking for a way to help alleviate that situation to where, at least in one case, if they could get a PPA more quickly because they can come online, possibly energy only, much more quickly than what it takes for them to be full capacity delivery status, then those projects could actually get a PPA, move forward, get their financing, and actually come into commercial operation, albeit having to wait for full capacity delivery status and be counted towards RA. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. So it's not really limited to projects seeking the deliverability for the first time, but those who already have received TPD as well.
Well, if they've already received it, then it's not a concern for them. The concern here is that they may never be able to receive full capacity delivery status, or excuse me, let me put it this way, they may never be able to obtain an allocation under allocation groups having a PPA or being shortlisted because no one is actually providing PPAs for projects that become full capacity delivery status so many years into the future. So while they may have their 3 to 4 opportunities to get an allocation, in the end, those opportunities will never really get them anything because no one's, either doing shortlisting or PPAs that far in the future for full capacity delivery status.
Yeah, okay, makes sense to me. Thank you.
Let's go to our next hand from Mike.
Hi, Michael Freeman from SCE. Just want to echo some of the previous comments here. I mean, I think in theory, this construct could work, but I think it could potentially lead to over procurement, especially on the capacity side and reliability. We're all anxiously waiting to see what RCPP holds, but if one is to be expecting FCDS from a project at a certain point, it's likely that projects be procured for reliability capacity. So if that capacity is not coming for the next 10 years, I mean, I don't know how an LLC is going to view that project other than energy only for contracting purposes, unless there's very specific portfolio needs. So I think there could be ways that this could be helpful, but I think this could lead to potential over procurement in reliability space, or just stranding projects that there's not a need for this sort of like conversion from energy only to FCDS that far in advance. So I would just caution with this proposal. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, just to speak to the over procurement for RA, projects would not be able to get an allocation for RA capacity, the transmission plan capacity that would make them fully deliverable beyond what the portfolio, requires for deliverability on the system. So, just to make sure if I'm understanding your statement that, at least LSEs wouldn't be at risk of procuring more RA capacity than they need, because we'd only allow through the allocation process up to the amount that the portfolio requires.
Well, I think that the nuance comes in if you're buying, if you're looking at what what your capacity needs are, and you're buying this project that may or is going to have deliverability account for RA at some point, but say 8 to 10 years, you're going to have a window where there's going to be uncertainty in when that project is going to be able to show up in an RA portfolio, and so it's going to could potentially have long-term implications, because if you're in a market where you're procuring long-term assets, how are you judging, like, okay, when is this project going to come online or get RA at year 6, year 8, year 10? I mean, that's a a big swing in when you can expect RA in a portfolio, and then how do you backstop that? Is there enough short-term resources? You have to procure additional long-term resources. So it just makes planning for reliability more difficult. And so, I could see projects that have this sort of option, they could potentially be stranded because LLCs may not want to take this sort of risk.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So it makes me think about, is there, what is kind of the risk profile? Is there certain projects that could become full capacity delivery status for RA sooner, to where you'd be willing to take a risk on something that, you contracted and you have to wait, 3 years after the project goes into energy only operation, versus a project that might, have to wait 5 years or more? And what is the likelihood of that particular DNU that's required to make them full capacity delivery status what's the likelihood of that DNU actually being delayed? And what sort of, risk profile related to the actual in-service date of the DNU would you like to see mitigated to the greatest extent possible? So, there may be certain project conditions that are just too risky, and you would not be willing to go down that road. But there may be other projects that the risk profile is less, and you'd be willing to do something with that type of a project.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go to our next hand from Mark.
Hi, Bob. Can you hear me? It's Mark Smith with Calpi.
Yeah. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Bob. Interesting concept. And I know it has flaws and difficulties. What I'm curious about is, from a compensation standpoint, what happens when it finally becomes FCDS? Are you envisioning that there would be a change in the compensation, or that there would be some kind of damages if the unit FCDS is delayed? I think, listen, when you're building a project, you have a certain pro forma you have to meet, and regardless of whether it's energy only or FCDS, you have to meet a certain return obligation. So the question is, does something change in the compensation in your view of this PPA when it finally becomes FCDS?
I think the best I could answer is possibly. I'm not an expert at developing, 20-year contracts or resources, and what, your debt service payments and, profitability obligations and so forth, what those look like, how much flexibility do you have within, a revenue stream of a project that would be energy only for a number of years before it becomes full capacity. So I guess I'd have to leave that question to, the folks that have the expertise of, what could be done in order to create a revenue stream that is acceptable and a payment, to the developer, and the payment scheme that's acceptable to the off-taker.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
that's right. And more importantly, probably to the financial markets. I mean, how could a developer obtain reasonable financing if in fact they are not getting a capacity payment during this interim period until you get FCDS? It seems financially like a very difficult nut to crack. Okay, thanks, Bob.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's go to our next hand from Emily.
But just to speak to that a bit more, Mark, you know, from what experience I do have, you throw out an issue, a problem to the financial community, and they seem to be pretty adept of coming up with some solutions to that. So, you know, I think they're, you know, I would be hopeful anyway that some solutions could be found. So go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question, as I'm thinking through this.
Sorry, Emily. Sorry, Emily. Can you state your name and affiliation first, so we know who's speaking?
Oh, sorry. This is Emily McCrory with Long Road Energy. I guess there's sort of two ways to think about this, right? Like, of course, the project needs a long-term contract to be financeable and actually be built. So you could either sign an energy-only contract and come on as energy-only and commit to selling that energy for, you know, probably 15 to 20 years, and then sign an FCDS contract closer to the time when that's available, maybe, you know, let's say 5 years into the operations. But I think what is more likely is that you would sign a contract that says you would, you know, sell energy only, contract for some time, and then once the FCDS, as soon as it becomes available, you would start selling RA into the market. And in that sense, the TPD allocation issue is the same, because you would have that FCDS contract for your TPD allocation as soon as you came online. So I guess let me ask first, like, is there one of those scenarios that you're envisioning over the other?
No, I don't think that we've boxed ourselves in any way related to that, that if it, you know, took two different contracts to accomplish what is needed from the developer side to be able to move forward, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, because in the first case where you get to come online, or I guess in either case, you get to come online earlier, but only as energy only. And, you know, that's essentially the exact same as coming online as an energy only project. I think the real reason that becomes attractive to a developer is if you have the interim deliverability status and you're you have that incentive, the financial incentive to come on earlier. So to me, I think this construct is, you know, it's solving around this TPD allocation issue, but in terms of the contracting, like, the project would need to sign an FCDS contract, whether or not it gets built earlier.
Right. We would need that FCDS contract in order to be able to get the allocation of RA, or the TPD allocation.
So I guess what is the incentive to come on earlier?
Yeah, and I guess a concern I would think that, you know, the off-taker community might have in that scenario where there are two different contracts is, and they say, well, why would I actually want to enter into an energy-only contract if I'm not going to actually utilize the RA from this facility under a, you know, tied-up contract in the future? And they may say, I really have no appetite for, you know, much energy-only capacity at this point in time, unless, you know, the off-taker of the RA component of the project were to work with the LSE to make sure that they know that they'd be getting that RA capacity at some point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I would suggest thinking beyond PPAs. Like, if the concern is about project viability, there's a lot of other criteria that developers use to mitigate risk during the process. And so, you know, we don't need to box ourselves into only thinking about these contracts and the terms that are in them.
Well, if you have some ideas of criteria that from the ISO perspective, we have a confidence that without a PPA, that a project is going to move forward and actually utilize the TPT that they'd be allocated, you know, we're open to hearing those ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Our next hand is from Max.
Hi, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So I was just wondering if this theoretically is something that could happen today under the current rules. Like I understand that you need FCDS as part of the PPA to receive or to be in the group. But is this sort of a suggestion from the ISO, or would there be a formal rule change to go along with this?
I'm not, well, within the current MTR rules, there may need to be a change related to that. However, you know, as we advance in time, there's going to have to be some new orders that come out, and I would definitely hope that those new orders would help accommodate this type of a structure. I don't know that I would rely on having the current MTR orders actually change to allow this.
Okay.
But I'd have to leave that to the folks that are really dealing in those, you know, those discussions at the CPUC, where I'm not directly involved in that.
Okay. And then this is more of a discussion point. I'm not an expert in ERCOT at all, but I know that energy only or arbitrage-based financing happens in ERCOT. I'm not sure why, but maybe we can have a discussion about if there are like market reformations CAISO can make in order to make financing energy only purely arbitrage a possibility. Maybe it's just market dynamics of ERCOT, but again, I'm not an expert there, so curious if there are any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert to be able to speak to that. We'd have to get some of our market folks involved in that kind of a discussion.
Great. If there are any other developers on the call who have experience in ERCOT, I'd be curious for their thoughts.
Yeah, so I think we've probably discussed this PPA item question that we have up here. So why don't we open it up to other solutions, not to close the door on the prior one, but let's, you know, we're kind of headed that direction, it sounds like. So let's, you know, if anybody has other ideas around this that we should consider, if you've got something you'd like to share at this point in time, feel free to raise your hand.
So we still had a number of questions in the queue. I don't know if they're still related to something earlier or the prompt now. So Susan was the next hand, and then there's still a few hands after her.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I wanted to follow up on Emily's statement and also point out that you already have in your existing framework with the non-LSE element, which is fairly new, a way that projects can come in, potentially demonstrate that they can be viable without actually having an RA agreement. So with the non-LSEs, where you've got, you know, Amazon Energy coming in and, you know, where they're able, their PPAs are allowed to count, but they have to put in an extra deposit, and which is subject to loss if the project withdraws, if they do not have, if there's not an agreement with an LSE. And their point when they were writing letters to the board about all of this was that if they had RA, of course, it's a valuable thing, and they would, of course, sell it. And there's no reason they would hoard it or not use it or anything like that. And if a project comes in with an energy-only PPA, and with the idea that, you know, and is willing to put in, say, an additional deposit or something like that, it's really pretty much similar to what you've already got with the non-LSEs that are not themselves going to use the RA. So the idea of a viability measure for a project, if they could come up with a contract where they could come online with an energy only contract, that, you know, somehow that would allow them to get financing and build, that seems like something that maybe you could even sort of expand what you've already got in place. So that was one thought. Another thought,
Susan,
though,
just to speak, can I just speak to that? Because we do have, you know, a pathway for that to work. You know, they wouldn't be able to get their allocation until they actually come into commercial operation as energy only, but that is a pathway that would work. If they want to be assured that they would get deliverability prior to them coming into commercial operation, you know, that's something we'd have to probably look a little bit more deeply into.
Well, again, a contract with a non-LSE it requires RA, but they don't have any connection to an LSE at that, or they may not have any at that time, and you've provided an alternative way for them to come online. And it does make sense if you trust the market that if they've got RA and people want RA and will need it, that they will be able to sell it. So they should yes, the idea is that right now, a non-LSE contract will qualify a project for, for an allocation. And this might be, I guess I'm wondering if there's just a way to expand that framework a little to encompass projects that have energy only contracts because they don't have RA and they won't have it for years, but they could still qualify for an allocation and then use it when they get it. So kind of, anyway, I would encourage you to open your mind a little bit on that one and see if you can possibly adapt the framework that you already have for that. The other thing I wonder is really the focus here, I think, is, I think everyone sort of acknowledges that the solar and wind projects could come online as energy only. And I have seen PPAs of energy only contracts with those kind of resources. But the resources that have more RA, obviously the RA is a bigger piece of the value, and in particular storage, although you may see some, I don't know, offshore wind or some other things that have also high RA values. But if you could find a way to get storage to be valuable, I've never seen an energy only storage contract. But storage could provide, for example, flexible RA if it wasn't bundled with NQC. So, and storage has value, ancillary services, obviously arbitrage. There are other value that storage provides, but it's very hard to get any of that, to monetize that in the market. So I'm just wondering if you focused a little more on storage, which is a huge part of the capacity you're talking about here, and the part that has the most problem getting any kind of contract without RA. Maybe, like I said, flexible RA, some other things you might be able to do to let storage provide more value without having NQC. Maybe that might be a way to get through some of this.
Okay. And, I'd ask you to think about these as well. And if you have some specific proposal you'd like to put forward, we'd love to hear them.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Sanjay is our next hand.
Callers, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. On behalf of Calware, so a few thoughts here. First is when I look at QC14 who has received allocation, a lot of them are in group A, right? So they have a PPA. Many of them are behind those long lead time transmission upgrades. So maybe one thing is we can use QC14 and see how they can secure PPA, knowing that some TPP upgrades are needed. And also echo what you and Susan just discussed. I think there's the current framework, but you are proposing to change the treatment for energy only seeking deliverability, also the group D. But those change may contradict the intent here. It could make this even more difficult. So I would I feel to consider all the pieces together and come up with a more comprehensive solution. And last is in the revised TPD allocation report, ISO has identified a subset of projects that received TPD allocation, not relying on just the transmission upgrades. So I think that's a good start point, and maybe ISO can build on top of that practice, make it combining some feature like first ready, first served, considering the COD of those projects when you assign projects FCCS, not dependent on the long lead time transmission upgrades. That may also help here, at least, from the off-taker side, they will know not every project is dependent on those, so they are willing to give the PPA or shortlist to some of the projects.
Okay.
That's all.
One thing that came to mind is, some criteria around if a project is energy only, but they've began construction activities. Would that qualify them possibly then to seek an allocation, even without a contract? From our perspective, we'd need some level of assurance of, to what extent they've actually begun construction activities. You know, it's not a matter of, you know, we've turned one shovel of dirt, so we can begin construction activities. And so we would qualify, we'd have to have something fairly substantial in that area to demonstrate that they are truly in construction and, you know, have sunk enough money into that process to that they would continue. So let me just throw that out for everybody to think about as possibly some additional criteria and what that might look like, or something similar to that.
Eusebio is our next hand.
Morning, Bob and Danielle. Eusebio Bio, EDF Renewables. Thanks for more of an in-depth review of these items. Really appreciate you taking more time. So, focusing more on possible other solutions. For long lead time resources defined in resource policy goals, currently, can you help me?
Can I just stop you for a second?
Yes.
Slide 14 is going to specifically address long lead time resources. So we're not to that one yet. So if you have, you know, ideas around that, if you could hold off until we get to that item, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Well, if I could finish the question and if it's more relevant there, I'll be fine to hold on, if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So for those type of resources, I'm not sure what the PPA requirements are, but we're assuming LSCs are including that in their individual IRP submitted to the CPUC, and it's accounted for in the base portfolio that's used for transmission planning, right? So might not be a PPA, but just kind of exploring that option where maybe there's more of a binding exclusivity contract or some other less structured PPA where there's interest from an LSC, it's accounted for RA once a network upgrades online, right? Something where it fits certain parameters. But I heard you in the last, I think the last person discussing, you mentioned where CAISO might want to see some construction activity just to make sure it's not a paper project, because that could be an obvious concern for CAISO. But is that kind of the current thinking right now, where you want to see construction sooner rather than later? So have a project where there's TPD 10 years out, but you need to have COD or potentially as an energy only project 5 years from now. So there's a approximate 5-year gap. Is that the intent right now, where just to avoid paper projects logging or, you know, slowing down the queue process?
I wouldn't necessarily say that's the intent, because the real problem that we've laid out is that if a project cannot get a PPA or be shortlisted within the 3 to 4 opportunities that they have to seek an allocation and they're converted to energy only, then, you know, depending on how the final proposal actually plays out, they could be very limited to ever being able to get full capacity delivery status for the project. So we're looking for ways to see if we can provide allocations to projects within that 3 to 4 windows of opportunity. And you know, could be that if we do something more creative related to a power purchase agreement, you know, then they actually could either be shortlisted or obtain a PPA within that window of opportunity. You know, but I did throw out, you know, what if a project did become energy only, or what if it's decided it does want to move forward as energy only, but they're not able to get a contract? Could they possibly get some assurance that they would actually get an allocation prior to them actually coming into commercial operation? So I think that's something worth further thinking and discussion.
All right, appreciate that. I'll think about that more and provide informal comments. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to our next hand from Eric.
Hi, Eric Little from CalCCA. So maybe you said this when the discussion was going on and I missed it, but on the discussion about contract values of, a project that comes on as energy only and later gets FCDS, I think this goes back to the discussion earlier about what is the PUC going to accept and what is the ISO going to put in their rules about what counts for resource adequacy and what counts for new resources coming online. I would really like to avoid uncertainty because that creates problems in contracts. It creates inefficiencies in pricing. So we really need to solve that problem first. If we're going to say that a contract that gets energy only for a certain period of time but converts to FCDS counts to meet RA program for that period of time and counts to meet new gen resource needs at that time, then that takes care of a lot of the problem with pricing in the contract and really only leaves the one risk of did it actually get there in the time frame that it was supposed to, rather than, well, during the time frame that it's not, it's energy only and has a different value than another resource in a different period of time. I just think we create too many problems in the marketplace by doing something like that. So I would encourage us to resolve the issue with the ISO and the CPUC first as to what it's going to mean for these to be temporarily energy only and what they actually count for. Thanks.
Eric, I fully agree with that. I could understand from your perspective, you want that assurance, and that seems very reasonable to request that and require that. I just want to test one thing that I'm not sure if I heard correctly or not, but from our perspective, if a project came online energy only, but not able to become full capacity delivery status for RA for, say, 3 years, I wasn't anticipating that they would actually count for RA as soon as they came on as energy only. I'm not sure if you were thinking that, but that thought crossed my mind. So just to make sure that we're on the same page there, I don't think the ISO would be in a position where we'd want to count a project to qualify for RA purposes before they actually have the required deliverability network upgrade and service.
In that case, given where RA market values are right now, I don't know why any LSC would want to sign a deal with anybody that isn't FCDS from day one. That's where the value is right now. Market prices for RA are just absolutely off the chart at this point in time. So if I've got a choice between two resources, one that's going to be FCDS and one that's going to be energy only, I am skipping the one that's energy only all day long.
Okay, but what if we're in a situation where the ones that can become FCDS day one are non-existent, and the only option then is to either procure nothing or procure something for energy only for some period of time, knowing they'll be RA eligible in the future?
So what you're saying is, regardless, I'm going to get RA penalties until I am dead and gone. And at that point, I don't really care what happens with the energy only contracts when they come on anyhow. We have to resolve the RA problem. That's where the issue is.
Yeah, okay. Well, definitely that's, again, within the realm of the PUC where they would have to allow this. And, I just want to make sure we're thinking about a scenario where it really does make sense, not just say, well, it doesn't make sense in a particular scenario, so I'm not going to think about it at all. We want to produce a process that has, multiple options and opportunities for projects to move forward and for off-takers to procure projects.
Yeah, understood. I don't think there's a lack of precedence for the PUC accepting things that were energy only that later became FCDS. I believe Edison put some battery storage in place that was distribution interconnected, that the PUC was perfectly happy with until it achieved FCDS and was energy only during the first period of time. So I think there is precedent for doing it. I don't think you can do it with 100% of the resources. So there needs to be a conversation about what amount of energy only contracts, temporary energy only contracts, are we going to allow to satisfy those types of reliability requirements. If we're not thinking about that in this space to be able to bring on new resources, to be able to compete on the grid to reduce prices for customers, then I think we're missing the point completely.
Well, I think that's a good point, and we would appreciate you to provide that in your comments that, is there can we put, some definitive amount of what the PUC would accept in this scenario moving forward?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, everyone, this is Danielle. I just want to maybe kind of lift this up a level. I think this conversation around the question that we're posing on the slide is drawing out some key questions that we need to continue to ask and key issues that we need to resolve. But I think the bigger issue here that we're trying to address is there are projects that are at the end of a long line who are probably facing very long lead time upgrades. And how can we make both the commercial timelines and the deliverability timelines in the ISO's policy proposals align with those, construction timelines or with those development timelines and in-service dates. And so I really appreciate this discussion, but I think continuing to think more broadly and creatively, we put forward a contracting solution that I think, frankly, we don't really even have control of within the ISO's policy. These are just ideas and brainstorming that we're trying to generate and explore here. So if you have other ideas, especially those that are maybe more relevant and directly related to the ISO's policy initiative that we can be thinking about in terms of these timelines, we welcome those in written comments or today too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Danielle. And I think I don't know how many raised hands we still have in the queue, but I'm thinking maybe it's time to move on to the next slide. 2 more? Okay, let's just end it at these 2.
Okay, our next 2 are Rhiannon and Mike. Rhiannon, you're up.
Thank you so much, Ryan Quadro with Gridwell Consulting. I just wanted to bring up an item that developers will be considering when they think about potentially coming online energy only before their FCDS. In particular with solar and battery storage, as soon as that hardware comes online, it begins to degrade. Energy storage sometimes can be between 1% and 3% annually. And when I have worked with interconnection customers to approach the CAISO's key management department to get approval to sort of arrange a non-degrading facility so that panels and storage can be replaced without changing the nature of the project, but to keep it at 100%. We've hit some roadblocks there. And so one thing that could be helpful in constructing this paradigm where they come online is the ability to get through that MMA process for that kind of change, without the large deposit structure, without the 6-month timelines for review, even though, it is a change to the generating facility, it's really a straightforward change. And then also for the CAISO's consideration that if generators are online for years before their FCDS, when the real contract revenue kicks in, they will be baking those costs into their LSC contracts going forward. So, you will see sort of a rise in the cost to produce the generation in the first place.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay, let's go to our last hand. It's from Mike. Mike, go ahead. You may need to unmute your other.
Yeah, Mike, we're not getting any audio from your line. You might be double muted. If you can try unmuting yourself via your headset.
How about now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Great. My computer switched my microphones. Apologies. Yeah, Michael Freeman, SCE. I guess one point of clarification on Eric's comment. The utility assets, they were distribution connected. They're not market assets, so they were providing quote unquote capacity benefit through load reduction. But yeah, I want to also touch on Susan's point and maybe make a clarification that, or maybe just kind of reframing some of the capacity conversation. So I think traditionally a lot of the procurement for renewables have been okay to be energy only because they're satisfying the RPS program. So there's no requirement for them to have FCDS, but going forward in the new slice of day framework for the commission, the way that we can, fill up all the batteries procured under the MTR procurement is through, solar or wind or renewable projects with FCDS. So it is imperative that the renewable projects do have FCDS going forward, or it's going to be something that I would assume all LLCs are looking at. So, the comments have been made about RC Triple P, and I think a lot is going to be kind of shed to light like what those requirements will look like. So, all the comments here about like the difficulty of contracting, portfolio optimization, like all those are very valid. And I guess I could see this proposal potentially being useful if there is so much clean energy that's required that we're just, skimming going to the bottom of the barrel for projects. But other than that, like I think certainty and kind of echoing what other folks have been saying, certainty in what LLCs are contracting for, and also developers and like what their payments are going to be is very critical. So, I think this proposal is a good fallback if needed, but as like business as usual, I think LLCs and developers are going to want certainty of what products are going to be delivered.
I appreciate that, and I guess I'd like to just challenge everybody that if from your perspective this is only going to fit in a very limited number of cases and really is not going to do much to solve the overall issue here, what are some other alternatives that you might consider? Keeping in mind that the ISO is going to be mindful about some criteria that allows projects to get an allocation and then sit in the queue seeking a PPA. And if they don't get one, we're then in a mode trying to figure out how to pull that allocation back from a project that isn't moving forward. So, that's kind of the other side of this coin is, if we move through a process to where we change the criteria for giving an allocation out, we want to make sure that it's something that is manageable and doesn't take transmission plan deliverability off the table for other projects that might be more viable but not able to receive it because certain projects have received an allocation, but they're not moving forward. So why don't we move on to the next issue, which is similar but somewhat unique in that in this case we're talking about a project that may not have long lead time deliverability network upgrades, but its reliability network upgrades are further into the future where they can't even come online, even energy only. And so in this case, when projects are in that mode where they've got a long lead time RNU, it's going to be difficult for them to get a contract and to be able to actually get an allocation of TPD. And if they don't get a contract and get that allocation, then they may be in a mode where they're not even going to want to fund their RNU upgrade costs to get it going. So that particular RNU may just sit there on the books as, it's in someone's study report, but no one's actually doing anything to actually move that RNU into design and construction phases because they're not willing to fund it because they don't have a PPA and don't have financing. So, the question is, are there significant issues that making contracting for projects further into the future inappropriate? So where, in this case, they're not even going to be coming online, but we've got a contract for a project that's COD is maybe 7 years out. Is that something that both the developer community and the off-taker community would be willing to consider doing contracts that far out?
Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I'm not sure if this will be particularly helpful, but I wonder if they're, again, sort of thinking about precedents for what you've already got. I know this didn't really go very well, but I've forgotten the acronym for it, but the idea of a trunk line gen tie, where you had some idea where, you know, if you know projects are going to go somewhere and you're going to need an RNU there, because you've already got some commercial interest, you've got people with interconnection requests, and it's just that this one thing that maybe because they don't have PPAs. Is there some other funding mechanism you can use for that that is not dependent on the individual developers? If you have and I don't know what this looks like exactly, other than you've already got a bunch of projects or some projects that have already funded studies and put in whatever deposits are needed. And so they've already put up something to be there and get there. Is there some way through something less than, you know, having to put up your third, you know, security deposit 30 days after you sign a GIA, that where either they could demonstrate something or there could be some more, I guess, socialized funding of this so that people have some, you know, can move ahead without having to fund it because they don't have PPAs. I don't know. Anyway, I know that's probably a little convoluted and I apologize, but I'm just wondering if there's some alternative funding mechanism that can be used with some demonstration that projects actually are going to locate there or certainly are interested in doing it.
Well, Susan, I will mention that you're raising an issue that I've thought about. And so during our conversations at the end of the meeting with this PUC, you know, I raised the issue of, would it be possible or would they consider a process where, you know, but I termed it as build it and they will come. So
yeah, that's sort of what I had in mind too. Yeah.
Yeah. If certain either substations that would be what would be considered no regret substations, that there would be, you know, very minor risks that if a substation was built, that it wouldn't be used and become stranded, or there are particular upgrades, RNUs that could be built to where, you know, the portfolio says we need a lot of capacity in this area, and we know what some of those RNUs are, that we could go ahead and build those ahead of time, or at least have the CPUC jurisdictional utilities build those upgrades ahead of time and be able to get rate recovery before they're actually utilized by a particular resource. And they seem to be open to at least discussing that. So, you know, I think that is a potential issue that, you know, I'm sure there's other solutions, but that's one I think should be on the table for discussion, but that's totally outside of the realm that the ISO can solve.
Yeah, no, I realize that, but I do think, I mean, the CAISO does have a framework for that for trunk line gen ties, and so could you use something similar to that, you know, here? And the other thing is for short circuit duty kind of things, you know, there's such a big demand for it that let's say you ordered it and it, you know, was a socialized kind of cost, but it wasn't needed in that location. Well, you could certainly use it somewhere else. There are plenty of other people, you know, places where that equipment is needed and could be used. So you brought up the idea, I think it's more like switching stations. That's also a good one for this. But I was thinking the short circuit duty also, because there is alternative uses for that equipment. If something happened and let's say you didn't need it here, it really could be used in some other place.
Right, and that's something that I really don't see the ISO being in the business of actually procuring equipment, but you know, it would be
not procuring
the
equipment. Not procuring the equipment, but the same with the and I really apologize. It's obviously senior moment. I can't think of the acronym, but there's a place for trunk line gen ties. The CAISO doesn't do it, but the CAISO approves it. And if the CAISO could approve it, and obviously I think you would probably need to talk to the CPUC, but in the other case where with the gen ties, you just have to have a certain measure of commercial interest, or that, you know, there are standards for how that kind of thing could be approved. And so I don't think the CAISO would do it itself. I think the CAISO would provide a framework where the PTOs could do it and get recovery for that, and you know, with maybe relatively little risk. Anyway.
Yeah, so this is Robert. I think you're thinking about the LCRF process, but
thank you. Yes, I could not remember the name of it. Thank you.
But getting back to the short circuit, we just approved some short circuit upgrades at Miguel and Imperial Valley that were in phase 2 studies as required by the generators. The portfolios triggered them, you know, plus the transmission plan and the portfolios triggered the need for those upgrades. So they went through the TPP process and then were removed from the phase 2 studies or the LGIAs. So I think we already do what you're saying mostly.
Well, I don't know that I've seen that with the short. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is already there, but certainly it seems like there's a lot of situations where these people are waiting for these things. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it on this slide. So I'm just wondering if maybe you could expand whatever it is you're already doing. So anyway,
Well,
I'll try and
if they're driven by
put
the
something cohesive here.
portfolio, they move forward. If they're not driven by the portfolio, most likely we don't need them. It's just there's too many projects in the queue that need to be sifted out.
Okay, so what's the point of having this bullet point here then? I don't know. Anyway, I'll try and articulate this a little bit better after thinking about it. But it seems like if you've got a lot of people waiting for long lead time upgrades, and it seems like they may be needed. If they're not needed, well, then I guess I don't know why you're worrying about it. So I don't know. Anyway. Okay, I'm done.
Well, you asked the question, why are we asking the question? If projects could actually get a power purchase agreement during the window of opportunity to move forward, then, that would be one potential solution for projects in this scenario. But I have heard that long lead time type contracting is riskier for both the developer and for the off-taker. And so, is that something that, entities would even consider doing longer lead time contracts? Is that something that is worth further discussion, or is the aggregate of comments going to be, no, we don't think this is a viable opportunity and take it off the table, let's look for other considerations?
I think if somebody orders them to do it, they would do it. But anyway, okay, thanks. I'm for what that's worth. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. We have a hand from Dinesh.
Good afternoon. This is Dinesh Salem Natarajan with EAS Energy. Susan, thanks for the discussion, and Bob, perhaps just listening to you and also Robert's thoughts on this. If you have a situation like this, then would that, I think where you're going with this is projects are hesitant to put down securities to proceed further with project development when you have long lead times for the upgrades. But would these be the situations where you would again, not just the delivery network upgrades, but would these instances of RNUs be triggers for including them as part of the portfolio, which is what I think Robert said, but wouldn't that make this issue a redundant one, because you would anyway be addressing them if they are needed? But does my question make sense?
Yeah, Robert, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, the portfolio development is not under the ISO. That is done by the regulatory agencies, primarily the CPUC, but others as well.
But so then, Robert, maybe what I'm thinking here loudly is perhaps should there be a process where the ISO, based on such findings, provides a feedback into guiding some of the portfolio development process? Would it make sense to do it to where, if CAISO identifies a bunch of RNU upgrades that result in long lead times, but for which the projects might be able to be developed and interconnect, then would those be data points that the CAISO can offer as inputs for the portfolio development process?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. We do that for delivery network upgrades for area constraints, where we provide the cost of the upgrades to the CPUC and the increased deliverability created by those upgrades. We have not done that for reliability network upgrades, but I suppose the same framework could be used where we provide the incremental increase in number of megawatts that could be interconnected and the cost of the transmission upgrade, the reliability network upgrade. But you know, that would be a big change, and it would have to be orchestrated. Obviously, all we could do is just propose it to the CPUC if we wanted to do that. Seems like a major change to perhaps a problem. We're also addressing this in Track 3B to some degree, where if it's pretty much just being driven by too many projects in Cluster 14, and half the projects can actually move forward without the short circuit upgrade, and we figure out which half of the projects can move forward, then I think that's also sort of chipping away at the problem. And do we need such a massive change of CPUC? I mean, it's like Bob's saying, and Danielle, we're looking for brainstorming ideas. So I don't want to shoot it down, but those are my thoughts.
No, I think it would, you do have an existing framework for delivery network upgrades, and perhaps, just to put some numbers, maybe you have 2,000 megawatts of projects that is triggering a particular RNU that result in long lead times. Perhaps you share that as an input, similar to what you do for the delivery network upgrades to the agencies that do work on that portfolio development, and they may come back and they may, pick 1,000 megawatts out of the 2,000 to be as a portfolio quantity. So at a minimum, at least you're following an existing framework that's there for delivery network upgrades as a method to the madness.
Well, I guess the other thought that comes to mind is you have to be careful with that. I mean, this could actually be more of a barrier to putting projects in the portfolio. As soon as we put a big transmission cost associated with projects in a certain area, that will tend, at least based on my observation, for the Resolve program to try and look somewhere else. Right now, we assume it's free in terms of reliability network upgrades, and that's probably the CPUC obviously would probably want to correct me on that, but there is no cost for reliability network upgrades right now. And so if the CPUC sees that area as a good place to develop resources, again, based on my limited observations, it goes into the portfolio. We then model those resources in the portfolio in the TPP. If that triggers that upgrade, it gets approved. And there's less friction on those projects moving forward than if we just start assigning transmission costs, you'd be creating friction, possibly. Again, that's just my limited observations on this.
Yes, I agree, Robert. I think, definitely takes some more, it needs some more thinking, but here, the impediment is not so much the cost, but actually the timeline, right? Or perhaps it's both, but I see your point of how the cost allocation might be a detriment to what we're trying to solve. So I do see that, yeah, there's perhaps more thought that needs to go in here. Thanks.
Next up in the queue, we've got Mike Freeman.
Let's see if I can get this time. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes.
Great. One of these days I'll learn. Okay, Mike Freeman, SCE. Yeah, I mean, from I guess an LLC perspective, if there's a path forward to getting TPD and there's certainty and a robust pool to select from, maybe I don't necessarily see an issue. I almost pose this question back to the developers and say, is this sort of development timeline something where you can commit a binding price to an LLC? Because I think that's probably more of a gating issue from ending into some sort of commercial terms. Is if developers can't lock into EPC agreements or have their costs nailed down with the project coming online in 5 to 10 years potentially, I think that's probably the bigger issue that I see with this. Thanks.
Okay, Bob, that was our last hand in the queue.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next slide. So this third issue is related to should special or unique TPD allocation criteria be developed for long lead time resources that meet the defined resource policy goals of local regulatory authorities to allow them to not be at risk of being converted to energy only before procurement begins for these resources. So again, the same problem related to TPD allocation process is playing out in this particular situation. You know, in some cases, some of these long lead time resources do have long lead time network upgrades, but in other cases they do not. But regardless of that particular situation, they're not ready to actually, you know, the fact that their project may take, you know, 10 years to actually to build the project, and you know there may be infrastructure such as offshore wind that needs to be put in place before you can even start building it. You know, so the question here is, will the central procurement entity be authorized and willing to contract for these resources within the period where these resources are eligible to seek an allocation? Or should we look in another direction to try to solve the problem here? You know, one question is, you know, should unique TPD allocation criteria that is only applicable to a long lead time resource be developed? You know, if we can't do something on the contracting side, should we develop unique criteria just for these type of projects to where they do have the opportunity to not be converted to energy only in the same timeline as other non-lead time resources would be? So with that, let's open it up for the further discussion.
Okay, we have a hand from Susan.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Just a couple of thoughts. I think, first of all, you already have some of these projects. I think there's some offshore wind projects already in the queue, some of which have allocations already. And given the timeline, I think the generally accepted timelines for offshore wind and perhaps some other technologies as well in the queue, I'm thinking you will probably have at some point to have to confront some kind of retention, TPD retention questions for those projects. So it's not really directly related to this right now, but I do think somewhere in this framework you're gonna have to consider the projects already in your queue. I think there's some in cluster 15 that given that combined with the commercial viability criteria that haven't been filed yet but that have been developed in track 2, I do think you're just going to have to pay a little bit of attention to that and keeping those projects, the sort of early projects that have come in with those technologies viable in some way if they're needed to meet these requirements. So the other thing I think is what I've been trying to figure out, and I'm gonna be very interested to see what you do on cluster 15, is you've got, if you're going to be doing a set aside for these projects or do any kind of thing with TPD or anything else, it's somehow if they're already in cluster 15, for example, if you're going to hold that capacity, but wouldn't you want them to have access to it? And but if they're already in the queue, anyway, I'm wondering how you're going to meld all that together with the 150% number. So again, I apologize, it's not really directly related to this question, but I think there's a few side questions that are floating around about this as well.
Right. I would say that, you know, we do have the tariff authority, as has been described in the papers, that we can actually hold back deliverability that is earmarked for these type of projects to where we don't allocate it to other type of technologies that are not part of the portfolio that the CPC gives us. So, you know, in these particular cases, we're either holding back existing or capacity that has been approved or will be approved by the board to add capacity to the system to accommodate these type of resources. You know, you said some already have allocations. I assume the allocation is an allocation group D. I'm at least familiar with one that got an allocation under allocation group D, but that is an allocation that is something that could be lost through the retention process. So you're right, could be part of the retention process. It needs to be thought about this, but from my perspective, I'd rather build it into the criteria where they can get it in the first place in a way that actually makes sense, rather than give it to them but then pull it back because they don't meet the retention criteria.
Well, I think there may be some group 3 as well, but you might want to check that. Also, for cluster 15, if you're going to hold back capacity and trying to determine what's a merchant zone or what's a deliverable zone and the 150% number, but they're in the group that is competing for the 150%, but there's also qualified for the holdback. I think that's I'm very interested to see what you do with that.
Yeah, we're developing a way to actually describe that process and that people understand that more fully.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Susan. Let's go to our next hand from Nancy.
Good morning. Yeah, Nancy Rader with the California Wind Energy Association. On the first question there, should special or unique TPD allocation criteria be developed for qualifying long lead time resources? Our answer is emphatically yes, and we'd actually hope that you would have proposed criteria for discussion on this call, because as you noted in the straw proposal and you just said, the policy is based on an existing tariff provision and is absolutely essential to align the TPP with the CPUC's portfolio. If we don't reserve capacity for the resources that the public policy network upgrades are planned and built for, up with a portfolio dominated by batteries, and we could end up with stranded assets that long lead time resources can't use because downstream capacity has been used up. We made a few comments, a few suggestions in our comments, and recommended that the LLT resources in the CPU's plan, whether they are in the queue now or not, should be treated as prior commitment. So they'll be prioritized over all of the resources for available TPD capacity, as well as newly approved public policy upgrades. Capacity needs to be reserved for generic long lead time resources because developers don't invest in remote resource areas where transmission doesn't currently exist and isn't being planned for. And so there's likely going to be less capacity in the queue than there is in the PUC's plan. And then, once the upgrades are in the planning stage, the 10-year timeline for planning and building those is just too far out to enable PPAs. So these resources really need to be treated separately from non-long lead time resources in the intake process to provide them an opportunity to obtain FCD status. Now, they should be required to meet reasonable project development milestones as the transmission upgrades advance through the permitting construction process to ensure that the upgrades are going to be used for the intended resources. But we're really looking to CAISO to make a proposal with these kind of details. And I just wanted to note that much of the TPD capacity that we're going to need for offshore wind at the Central Coast seems to have just been given away to non-offshore wind, non-LLT projects in the recent allocation process. So newly planned upgrades are now going to be needed to build out Central Coast offshore wind resources when it could have been reserved for those projects, so they could have come online in the early 2030s. Now that doesn't seem possible. So it's just really important that we get this policy in place as soon as possible. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Nancy. Let's go to our next hand from Max.
Hi. Yeah, I would love to echo Nancy's comment. I think it makes complete sense that if the CPUC is carving out all this capacity and pushing for those resources specifically, it only makes sense to reserve the capacity for them. I also don't have a comment on what those criteria would be, but we'll think about it and file some comments. I also wanted to just generally ask, I was going to ask and point out that it is in the tariff that CAISO has the ability to do this, but I'm not sure if it's been done before, how it works today. Is it totally just up to discretion, or has that reservation never been done? This question.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we are working on kind of further fleshing out how that policy will actually work. And I'm not sure if it'll actually be in the next paper or how we'll actually roll that out, but we'll make that information known.
Okay. Well, I think that will inform this process too. So, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Max. Let's go to the next hand from Mike. It's our last hand in the queue.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Mike Freeman again. So yeah, I just want to just echo that the central procurement entity, the procurement targets, or is a procurement authorization, and the commission was pretty clear that a reasonable amount of procurement could be zero. So I just want to caution any sort of earmarking of deliverability. Kind of wait till the CP procurement process is seen through, and we actually know what's going to potentially materialize, and that earmarking of any deliverability could take away from other more economic resources. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Did I hear there are no more commenters on this?
No more hands and no more questions no questions in the chat.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide then. So based on comments that we received within the last paper, we want to bring this issue up for people to consider and really weigh in on. In part, the ISO definitely has some interest around this, but I think the most important component of making a decision related to allocation group D really lies within the development community, as well as maybe a bit to a little lesser extent the procurement community. But the situation that we are considering at this point is, should we continue to allow allocation group D to be utilized as it is now? However, we are contemplating, if we do that, that we would actually remove the group D allocation restrictions, which are that a group D project may not request suspension under its GIA, they cannot delay providing notice to proceed, or they cannot delay their COD. If we continue to have this at the level that we saw, utilization of allocation group D in cluster 14, that becomes a bit of a tracking nightmare for the ISO, and starts to overshadow the real benefit that allocation group D has, which is giving projects a temporary allocation or a conditional allocation that must be retained through the retention process. So related to what we think as a pro related to this is that it does provide increased certainty for load-serving entities considering projects in their procurement proceedings, because they know that these allocation group D for a period of time actually have an allocation of TPD, and if they sign a contract or shortlisted within the reasonable period of time before the retention period comes up, they are able to retain that allocation. So rather than having to wait for the results of the next TPD allocation for some projects, we'll already know that they have an allocation. And again, though, that allocation would continue to be contingent upon retention requirements. On the other side of this, the main con, and at least in my mind, is that this will significantly reduce the available TPD capacity, which would then reduce the capacity of projects able to be studied in future cluster studies. So since we're using, in future clusters would be cluster 16 and beyond. So, knowing that we would allocate, in some cases, nearly all of the TPD that's available to allocation group D projects, the next window that opens for new projects would be impacted by that. When we go through the 150% of available capacity for each of the constraints, that will find much less capacity is available. And so as we determine what projects are able to be studied in the next cluster, it would be greatly reduced. So, these are at least in my mind, the main points that need to be considered do we want to keep allocation group D? And as I was saying, this may fall more into the realm of what do developers think? What do off-takers think? The ISO could go either way on this. So let's open it up for discussion.
Okay, our next hand is from Nancy.
Oh, hi there. I was wondering, I actually had my hand up to make another comment on the previous topic. Is that possible for me to do that?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate what we said in our comments about the central procurement entity, that the LLT resources that will be centrally procured are really a subset of the LLT resources that will need TBD capacity reservation. So the policy shouldn't be limited to centrally procured resources. The PUC really hasn't said that it thinks it should be limited to centrally procured resources, and we've asked the PUC to clarify that. And the second question you asked about will the CPE should be authorized and willing to contract with these resources within the period where the resources are eligible to seek an allocation. It seems to me that this is an issue for the CPUC or the DWR. But for offshore wind and geothermal, the contracting won't start until 2026 or 2027. So the CAISO really should consider that timeline in developing its policies on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Our next hand is from Susan.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I was curious when I read through this. I think it's one thing to say perhaps we should retain Group D, and I did read the LSE comments on that. I'm getting a lot of background noise. It's not me, but I don't know who that is. Anyway, there's one thing to say to retain Group D, but then to retain Group D without the restrictions, I was a little surprised to see that there. So I'm wondering, I mean, it seems like without the restrictions, you're going to get even more people using it, and I know a lot of people did. So my question is, can you explain your thoughts about, even if you retain Group D, why you would remove the restrictions? And again, they weren't popular, but they were there. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts there.
Yeah, if we could get whoever is not muted, if they could mute if they're not making comments.
Like you're pouring something in a glass.
or for the okay, I think we got it. Okay. When we originally created this criteria, we really were kind of trying to target projects that had a high level of certainty that they were going to move forward, that these restrictions that are associated with allocation Group D were something that the project would make a determination that, okay, these are acceptable risks for me as a project developer to accept, and I'm willing to get seek an allocation through Group D. However, we have seen, I think, many more projects take on that risk. In some cases, maybe not fully understanding those risks. And in other cases, now that we've gone through 2 cycles, they fully understand the risk and did it anyway. And in some, at least I know in a handful of cases, I think it was very ill-advised that particular project actually tried to go down the allocation group criteria. So it doesn't seem to be working as well as we would like it to. And then when we start to work with projects and say, okay, you either got an allocation or you didn't, or you lost your allocation, and we're trying, and here's how that's going to impact you, we just have received a lot of pushback and escalations related to just implementing the tariff. And so I guess in our mind, we're thinking that allocation Group D could have continue to be something that is valuable enough that we want to continue it, but it's not worth the headaches and the tracking requirements and all of the concerns that it puts on developers to continue the restrictions associated with it if we're going to see this high level of participation in allocation group D.
Okay, well, something in between might be, I know one of the things that we thought was really unfair was the idea that even if you didn't get an just because you ask for an allocation, there's things that follow you around forever. And so the restriction, and the fact that when you come out of it, if you park and then you come out of parking, that doesn't count as a delay. Or that doesn't count as a PTO delay. And again, not ascribing any fault to the PTOs. But anyway, something in between might be to perhaps, and I'm nobody can kick me under the table here, but maybe have some restrictions, but not if you don't get an allocation that they still apply, because I think some of your tracking is going to be people who didn't get an allocation, but now they have they're carrying this burden around forever. So there might be some in between path here that might make sense.
Okay, so what you're describing though is more of the policy that if we kept it. So I guess I'll ask you, Susan, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of actually keeping allocation group D, knowing if we keep it, it's going to reduce the number of projects that actually could be studied?
Well,
in
I don't have
clusters.
an opinion on that yet. I'm actually waiting to see what comes out on Friday and how bad that is. And I think that will probably inform people's opinions about what this should be going forward. So I actually don't have an opinion about that right now. I have this terrible fear that every place is a merchant zone, and you're going to end up with 20 projects out of 500 for cluster 15. But if it's not that bad, then maybe might do something else. So I actually don't know the answer to that question, Bob, and I wish I did, but I don't right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Thanks, Susan. Our next hand is from Caitlin. Hi, thanks. This is Caitlin Leoteris on behalf of American Clean Power California. Appreciate the discussion. Our comments that we put in on the last paper suggested retaining allocation group D, but then not allowing that allocated deliverability from group D to count against the deliverability available in future clusters. So we had proposed calling it conditional deliverability. And kind of conditionally allocating it, but then allowing that conditional deliverability to be kind of competed for from that project that conditionally received it, and then from future clusters. So I think if you were to proceed in that manner, you could address the main con that you've outlined below. So we'd advocate that you consider that as an option going forward.
Yeah, I guess I am a little concerned with how that would actually work, that if you actually have something that's conditional, at what point does it get firmed up? Does a load serving entity that's seeking to procure the project, do they have enough assurance that that capacity is truly earmarked for this project and they're not going to lose it? So, maybe that's something we need to flush out more of the details behind that particular proposal.
Yeah, no, understood the concerns there. I do think there are options and solutions we could explore, right? So I think it really would revolve around creating a kind of hierarchy of who gets deliverability first. Simple solution in my mind is if you have conditional deliverability and you get a PPA, that kind of firms it up, and someone would only be able to kind of begin competing with you if they actually received a PPA too in a later cluster. So I think there's probably some solutions there, and we're open to having those discussions going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Caitlin, that is the last hand that we had raised.
Okay, well, let's see, is Danielle still here?
Oh, we just got a hand from Jasmine.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of surprised it was going to be ended that quickly.
Hey, Bob. Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and I was wondering, I don't know if this is the right place for it, but was there any considerations from the ISO of thinking about like reserving TBD for the cluster? So like, for example, when you enter the queue, knowing that there was 150% of available capacity in that zone, taking that and like reserving it for that cluster, when it gets to the first TBD allocation cycle, I kind of feel like that will kind of eliminate a lot of this like uncertainty of whether or not to have group D or not, if developers going through the process know when they get to the TBD allocation cycle, at least for the first try, they have a really high chance of getting that deliverability that they got into the queue with in the beginning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember those comments, and I think you weren't the only one that actually provided that kind of a suggestion. My concern with it is if, let's say we gave to cluster 15 and said, okay, every project that comes in, first of all, we can't guarantee every project that comes in deliverability, so that's kind of hard to determine who actually would get it. It wouldn't be any specific project, but it would be earmarked for that cluster because there's more project capacity in any given cluster using the 150% methodology than we could actually give out to projects. So, you'd be tying up a lot of capacity for projects that, I suppose once that put in place and it ran through a few cluster cycles, then it kind of plays out to where, I guess let me say it this way, the transition period might be kind of difficult to where if you give it to all to cluster 15, what about cluster 14 and 13 projects that are saying, okay, I've been around for some period of time now, my development has been progressing and now I'm in a very prime position to get a PPA, but now I can't get it because the deliverability is locked up for the cluster 15 projects. I just see some thorny issues we'd have to work through to make that kind of thing work. And the other side of it is, if we earmark it for projects that are just beginning the study process, they're actually further behind than projects that have been fully studied and may actually take a significant capacity off the table that the procurement entities would like to be able to consider and actually procure sooner than have to wait for these studies to be completed. So those are my concerns related to that.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I wasn't really thinking about the transition, but I was just thinking if everything worked out in like 3 cycles later, then theoretically, like if you were to preserve it, then it would be there and developers would have this certainty in the future. But okay, I get your feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. So Bob, that was our last hand. There's no questions in the chat or any other hands.
Okay, well, let me turn it over to Danielle to close it up.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Well, thanks for all the discussion today. We do want to talk a little bit about next steps. So if we can go to the next slide and the next slide again, that'd be great. So we are taking informal comments on this working group meeting today and are also hoping that we'll kind of have a more extended discussion of some of the ideas that were proposed today and in comments during the working group meeting next week. So if you are interested in sort of drawing out or exploring a proposal at the workshop next Wednesday, please email ISO stakeholder affairs at CAISO.com by this Friday, August 30th, and we'll try to make sure that we can allocate time to everyone. I would say probably consider like a 5-minute presentation, just high level concept, and some time for maybe 5 more minutes of Q&A. So roughly 10 minutes. If you think you need a lot more time than that, that's fine. Just let us know in your comments. And then we'll also take comments on this after that workshop too, and are hoping to receive them by September 11th. We may actually put a comment template up. We're realizing, I think now that there's probably a lot of interest in submitting comments, even if informal. So if that changes and we want you to upload comments onto the ISO website, we'll send a market notice around. But for now, you can just send it to this email until you hear otherwise. And then we'll hope to have another good discussion of these issues next Wednesday. There's not a lot of time for a turnaround probably on your end, and there's also not a lot of time for turnaround on our end. So high level is fine, and we'll just lean on one another for exploring some of these issues and talking about pros and cons like we did today. Any
and
questions
we do have
on that?
a couple of hands. Yeah, so we have the first hand from Aisha.
Danny, I just wanted to ask if the next week's call is recorded. Uh, that we, so those who miss might be able to see it on your channel on YouTube.
So, Yelena, can you confirm that?
Yes, it will be recorded and it'll be posted probably by next Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned too that is a hybrid meeting. So if people want to attend in person, we'll be here on site, but we'll also accommodate virtual.
And if you'd like to attend in person, there's a registration link. If you go to the calendar on kaiso.com and go to that September 4th meeting, the registration link is there within that event. Our next hand is Team Jasmine.
Hey, Danielle, thank you. I was wondering, so the comments that are due September 11th, are they for the proposals and today's meeting?
Yeah, and all of the work group.
Okay.
Discussion.
I was wondering if would you guys consider maybe like pushing out the deadline maybe perhaps a week? Because I feel like if we were to have the working group next Wednesday, like we would need a little bit more time to digest the proposals, but instead of turning them around within a week, just so that we get more meaningful feedback.
Yeah, we're definitely looking for more meaningful feedback, so we can talk about that internally. These are informal comments, so I would take the September 11th timeline as kind of recommended to make sure that we can start incorporating some of the comments and ideas into our thinking before we develop the next proposal. But we can look at giving a kind of more formal extension of that as well.
Yeah, this is Bob. Just to address that, having developed the schedule, it always seems like you got plenty of time, between now and March. But if you look at every component that needs to play out, it's getting tight. So we, as Dennis said, we'll talk about it some more. But I wouldn't plan on having more time. If we give it, great. But if you could at least plan on the 11th at this point in time, we'd appreciate that. And we accept comments anytime between now and the 11th. So that's kind of the deadline for, sending in comments at this point, but you can definitely send them in earlier, even before the next work group meeting, if you want us to consider items for the next meeting.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
So Danielle, those are the only hands that we had raised.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think with that, I'll turn it back to you, Elena.
Thanks, Danielle. So we wanted to put another slide together for the reminder for the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair that's happening on September 17th. This is also going to be hybrid, and there's a link. I would do the same thing since this link is not clickable here. You can go to our calendar on kaiso.com and look at this event on September 17th, and all the links are provided there. If you'd like to register to attend in person, please register by the 13th of September. We have a hand from Larry. Oh, okay. Mike Freeman, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this was mentioned at the beginning of the call. Maybe I missed it, but when is there going to be another discussion around like the mechanics of the TPD allocation? I think that was the track 3A issues. And apologies if I missed a conversation earlier on.
Yes, so that will be the focus of next Wednesday's working group as well. We'll continue to address these kind of three primary categories of challenges that we're facing that Bob outlined earlier on the call today. So it will continue to focus on TPD allocations and the Track 3A revised straw proposal that went out before we the Track 3A straw proposal that went out before we iterate on the next draft.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much.
Well, just to be clear, though, as Danielle said, we are going to be focusing on these three or maybe the 4 items with allocation group D, but we're not going to get into presenting the other components of the proposal from the revised straw proposal. We've already gotten everybody's comments on those, so we know where everybody stands on those. So we're really looking at focusing on these particular items.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have a hand from Larry.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Larry Bourne III. I'm a transmission engineer at Ranger Power. I had a question regarding the interconnection standards fair. I know the past couple months you guys talked about, I don't know if it was this group particularly, but you guys touched on and did all the comments for track 2, or IPE track 2. Is that something that will be discussed at this fair also, or is this more for track 3? It will? Okay.
No, this fair is specifically designed for all of the projects that have already submitted interconnection requests into cluster 15 and have been deemed complete. Now that we have, we've filed for the FERC order 2023 tariff changes, as well as the track 2 tariff changes. We are going to be discussing how does that impact all the interconnection customers that are still, able to participate in cluster 15. So there's a lot of new requirements based on the FERC order and track 2 that everybody's going to need to know how to navigate that and how to, what needs to be done in order for them to be successful in getting to the point where we accept their interconnection requests as deemed complete by the close of the window, and also related to the scoring process and so forth for determining who all will be studied within cluster 15.
Gotcha. Just a quick follow-up, because I'm kind of getting into this late into the game, but I know CAISO did a FERC filing for their interconnection process. Is that still being reviewed right now in FERC, or is it have you guys received I guess FERC approval or feedback?
We have not received anything yet. The first filing that we did in April was related to FERC's order 2023. And so related to a compliance filing to an order such as order number 2023, FERC does not have a deadline of when they have to respond and give us an order for that particular filing. So that date is up in the air when we'll hear back from them. We're hoping sooner than later, but they're under no obligation to do that. Related to the track 2 that we filed August 1st, we asked for them to give us an order by October 1st. So okay. We're hoping that they will pretty much accept our order and everything will be as we anticipate.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. That's very helpful. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And just a last plug for registration still being open for our symposium happening on October 30th. And you can also visit our website to find more information about this. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion today. We're going to be wrapping up this call. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you all in the audience for joining today. With that, our call is concluded and you may now disconnect.